Today, the presentation will be about biofeedback and neurofeedback protocols that work. And when we get to that, we're going to discuss exactly why they work and what makes them work. So first, we have to go through an assessment. And the one that I use is the holistic assessment of resilience and performance. And from there, we're going to discuss certain key aspects of designing a training protocol. And from there, we're going to go into which protocols are effective and what the progression should be. And from there, we're going to go into some training considerations during the training and after the training has commenced. So first, we have to have an assessment of sorts. So the assessment should have similar aspects or similar factors such as these here. So we have self-report measures, we have objective functional measures, and then from there we can then decide, okay, what interventions are appropriate. Well, we don't just pick any kind of assessment or any type of self-report measures or history or self-report assessments. And we don't just pick any kind of quantitative or functional measures as well. But we have to make sure that whatever we do pick, that all of those triangulate to let us know where the person is. So what does that mean? Well, when it comes to self-report measures, performance metrics, and functional measures, we need to have assessments or measures that are observable across all sources. What does that mean? Well, we have to have independent sources that give us some information about the individual's overall well-being or whatever the condition is that we're trying to figure out or find out or train. So what we need to do is we need to come up with self-report measures. And then from those self-report measures, and I'll go over that in a little bit, we need to use that information in a certain way. Then when it comes to performance metrics, we can have the TOVA or a brain gauge or any kind of performance metric that lets us know something about, what the person, when it comes to the complaint of the person, that has to be measurable in some way in a performance type aspect. And then, of course, the functional measures such as quantitative EEG metrics or EEG morphology and ERPs, heart rate variability metrics, and so forth. All of those have to be constructed so that they tell us something about the individuals and let us triangulate those metrics that let us know about the condition of the individual. Once we've done the assessment, we have to put the goal, the client's goal, or their condition in terms or in words that we can actually see in the other metrics. For example, if we look at certain disorders, or if we want to look for a disorder is not something that we can necessarily see in the EEG. We can only see certain functions, electrical functions in the brain that correspond to certain types or that are consistent with certain types of symptoms that the person may be experiencing by, understanding neurophysiology and by understanding what the client means with what their condition is, and then also knowing what we're looking at performance-wise to triangulate whatever our goal is here and to make that effective. What it also implies is that we try to take away or eliminate any confounding variables or anything that may make the training less effective. For instance, diet or somebody's circadian rhythm or somebody's workout and their workout structure or whatever they do during their day. We have to make sure that matches what the person's goal is. So what that means is we want to make sure that, let's say somebody has sleep issues and has some kind of issue with recovery. We also want to make sure that the person's hormone levels are the way that they need to be, or if the EEG indicates that there could be something that happened to a person, like if the person has a history of TBIs, then of course we want to rule out that any of the dysregulated activity in the brain we want to make sure that is not due to some kind of hormonal issue, because again, that makes our training less effective if there's any kind of positive effect at all. So from there, we then design the training protocol. And the training protocol, we need to come up with steps that the person can take to maximize the effect of their training. So when it comes to designing a training protocol and the progression, so once we have all the data that we need, we've triangulated, we know exactly and specifically what areas are dysregulated and how, like whether it's part of the autonomic nervous system or like autonomic overarousal of the sympathetic nervous system, or if we have a U-shaped type of situation where the person's not fully recovered, such as when we have an increased parasympathetic activity during the day when it should be a little bit lower, that all tells us something about the individual. So when it comes to training protocols, the way to make them most effective is by starting with the physiology and understanding what the training requires. For instance, I usually start with heart rate variability training because a lot of the clients that I train, they do have some kind of limbic dysregulation or some kind of emotional mood dysregulation that keeps them from being able to attend. Well, what does that mean? Well, if somebody, for instance, is completely tired and is fatigued, burned out, that person will not be able to take advantage of neurofeedback as effectively as they could if they were able to self-regulate to a certain degree. And what that means is that, well, if somebody uses something like neurofeedback, which is based on learning theory, then again, to take advantage of that, if they can't learn, if they can't get themselves into a position or state where they can take advantage of that type of learning, then again, something else should be done first to help that person be able to recover first. And heart rate variability training or diaphragmatic breathing is an ideal way to start. So in addition to that, we also have to make sure that we do the training in a certain progression, not just that we have the different training protocols in a certain progression, but also that whatever training we do, it has to be in a certain progression. For example, when it comes to heart rate variability training, the way that I train individuals is I teach them how to breathe diaphragmatically, and then I adjust their breath cycle to be smooth, consistent, and the same volume consistently, while the person is breathing diaphragmatically. To really know if the person is breathing diaphragmatically, I have to have a breathing belt with my equipment, so that I can monitor their breath cycle and also the morphology of the person's breath cycle. So that is why that makes it more effective if I know what that person's breath cycle looks like. That person then has the ability to adjust their breath cycle accordingly. So when it comes to pace, I usually teach the person what pace to breathe at or find their resonant breath rate once they have learned to breathe diaphragmatically. And then the homework assignments are assignments that they can use wherever they are and match it to their lifestyle. Again, if I give somebody a homework assignment where they have to accomplish or do things that are not something that is normally part of their lifestyle, then it's going to be less likely that they actually comply with the homework, and eventually they may even give up because it causes more stress than it relieves. So that is why I go in a certain progression. After the person has learned to breathe diaphragmatically and knows how to breathe at a certain pace at their resonant breath rate, I then introduce music with a positive emotional valence, and where the tempo matches the client's resonant breath rate. And again, that then helps the person to do the training because, again, it is more exciting and also more soothing if the music that the person uses has, again, if it matches their breath cycle. And again, so that's what makes diaphragmatic breathing and HRV training very effective as the first tool. Then from there, I teach the person how to use autogenic training to help them reduce arousal even further and bring their body back into homeostasis. I teach them these 6 different types of exercises, and they can use them while they're doing diaphragmatic breathing or during HRV training. And they can consistently check in and stay and be mindful in the moment about their breath cycle and check in with their body. Is there any kind of, heaviness or anywhere or tension anywhere? And then they can relieve that tension and become more relaxed over time. Again, the autogenic training helps with the heart rate variability training. And again, it's if you put it in that, if you use this succession or progression, I find it to be very effective. After the person is able to relax and get into a state where they can self-regulate to a certain extent, I then start introducing neurofeedback training. I start with the more conventional types of neurofeedback first, and then I go on to being to more state-like training and more of the training that is more of the attitude of the autonomic and the central nervous system. So when it comes to sensory motor rhythm training, I find it very effective, especially since it can address various different issues and symptoms. Again, with the individual that I was training to develop the training protocol for here, this person, again, needed some training to be able to attend better and also needed help with some sensory integration. I do that for several sessions, and that can help this individual to have a stable mood, to be able to attend better. And from there, I then decided to go on to a different protocol. So this person also had, in addition to using C3, C4 SMR training, also used this C3, C4 migraine protocol. And I do that because that individual also had occasional migraines that kept this person from being able to think clearly and focus, which is completely understandable for those of us who've had migraines. It is pretty disturbing and it can keep somebody from being able to accomplish the tasks that they need to accomplish during the day. So with that training, what I usually do is I start up training the reward, which is set at 8 to 12 hertz, and then I lower that until the person with the migraine either begins to have a migraine, or if they do already have a migraine, the feeling usually gets worse and they have to push through it until we reach the frequency where they actually feel better. And then I keep training them at that frequency. And that is very effective in reducing the number or the frequency of migraines, as well as it gives the individual a way of, it gives the person some relief when they have migraines. Of course, if they have less migraines, it is more effective. Combining that with the SMR training, I find it usually helps people, especially people who do have migraines or who do have headache issues. If somebody starts heart rate variability training, then progresses on to SMR training, and then does the C3, C4 migraine protocol, it all works together really well to mitigate a lot of the symptoms that a person is experiencing, especially the migraines and the frequency of the migraines. From there, like I mentioned earlier, I go into the type of neurofeedback that is more state-related or state-like training. And again, in this transitional to state, there's less activity or less reduced limbic system arousal. And again, it helps reduce anxiety and helps the person to consolidate memories, as well as the person's brain has the ability to restore its default network function. And again, with a lot of individuals who have a hard time calming down, or a lot of individuals who can't shut off their brain, who have a busy brain, like this individual had, their default mode network is not functioning as it should. So what this helps with is that can reset the default mode network so that the person then is able to, when they need to shut down, they're able to shut down. From there, I then go into FPO2, the training for anxiety and stress to help the person reach a more optimal level of arousal. And again, usually this training is very effective with individuals, especially since just after a few minutes, it creates almost a euphoric type of a feeling in the individual if it is done correctly, which again helps the person's overall brain state or attitude to be more relaxed. And again, that in conjunction with the other previous protocols, it just builds up to help solidify the person's arousal state and helps the person to maintain that state over time. So when it comes to slow cortical potential training, ILF training, as well as FPO2 training that I just discussed, all of those are great because in training the person's overall, tone, so to speak, or valence of the neurons and the readiness of the brain to perform. So, for example, when it comes to slow cortical potentials, if the more positive it is, the less we know that the brain is less likely or less able to engage in new activities. And so to make a person more ready to engage into certain types of behaviors, such as this individual, this person needed to be able to think on his feet, think quickly. So that's where slow cortical potential training came in. Now, if the person had a history of trauma, that again, the ILF training as well as the FPO2 training and the alpha theta training can also help with that. All of those have the tendency to help the brain get back to a more ready and functional state. But again, it has to be done in a certain progression. Now, you may wonder, well, can I start with ILF training first or FPO2 training first? It is an option. However, I find that if I go the other way around, where I start with more, I guess with types of neurofeedback and types of training that are simpler for the person to really work with, that usually helps the person. And again, the skills that the person is learning and the neurophysiology of how these different protocols affect the brain, I find it more effective if we go from traditional types of neurofeedback and then into slow cortical potential or ILF training or FPO2 training. However, it depends on the individual. If somebody has a history of trauma, I may switch that around. I may still do this as C3, C4, SMR to get the person into a more stable mood, and then go into ILF, slow cortical potential, FPO2 training. However, and then I can throw in, alpha theta training in one place or another. However, the important thing is to match whatever training we do to what the person is experiencing and understand how one protocol builds on the next. For example, for this individual, I needed the person to recover first, so I started with heart rate variability training. Once the person was able to recover, I needed them to be in a more stable mood and to be able to attend so that I can engage in more other types of training. So that's when I started the C3, C4 training, and eventually went on to the slow cortical potential training and ILF training or FPO2 training to pretty much, so it's kind of like fine-tuning an athlete. So if I want to make them ready, that is a good way to do it. Or for people who have, again, issues with attention, again, if I started with ILF training or FPO2 training or alpha theta training, they may not get the full benefit if they're not able to get to a certain level of autonomic arousal first. From there, I then go into more advanced breathing techniques. And again, with the breathing techniques, there's also progression. So not just is there a progression to every type of breathing or every type of neurofeedback training, but also amongst the different types of breathing, there is a progression. And the way that I look at it is, so I look at the complexity of the task or the skill that I'm asking the person to learn. So it makes sense to start with something simple and then get more and more complex as we go along. Just like in math, we learn first how to add and subtract before we go on to multiplying, dividing, and then more complex types of math. So in the same way here, we start with diaphragmatic breathing, where the only muscle group that we're really focusing on controlling is the diaphragm, or we try to manage how the diaphragm works. So that's diaphragmatic breathing. Then on top of that, we can then add box breathing, which is a type of breathing where we also have to learn to manage our intercostal muscles as well as our diaphragm. And so it's a little bit more complex. It takes a little bit more skill. So again, this box breathing technique for this individual added to the fact that if that person was doing something physically, moderately physically, not something that is full out active, but just like walking, jogging, or the like, then the person was still able to regulate their autonomic activity so that they don't waste energy, or they're not using their autonomic nervous system as effectively as they could. So again, just like diaphragmatic breathing, this type of breathing is great for situations or conditions such as anxiety, and, where the person can be overactivated autonomically or sympathetically for that matter. And so I want the person to be able to not just be able to regulate or be in a more calm state when they're at rest, but now they can continue reaching that type of state while they're doing moderate activities. Of course, it takes more skill, but once they've learned diaphragmatic breathing, they're able to engage in that skill more effectively. And again, it builds on the skill set that they've already learned. From there, we can then go teach a person lateral breathing. And a person here doesn't just have to be able to manage their diaphragm and their intercostal muscles, but also the core muscles. So again, if a person is doing certain types of activities where they have to be in certain positions and they're not necessarily at rest, they can use lateral breathing as well as box breathing, but lateral breathing may be more appropriate for certain activities. Again, so that's where lateral breathing comes in. Then tactical breathing would be another type of breathing that is more for all-out type of activities that are sporadic and physically demanding, as well as mentally demanding. And so this type of breathing helps the person to keep relaxed and catch their breath when between spurts of activity. So again, using these types of breathing appropriately and in that progression makes all this breath training and these techniques very effective. What we can do now is we can put all those different types of training together. Of course, we have to make sure that we give a person's body and brain enough time to acclimate and do so and make these adjustments gradually. For instance, you don't want to teach diaphragmatic breathing and then next week teach a different type of breathing and so forth. You want to give the person time to adjust. And the same thing with neurofeedback protocols. You want to engage in a certain protocol for a certain amount of time before you change the protocol, because you want to let the person's brain adjust and learn the skill. Once the person has learned the skill or their brain is able to do what we ask it to do, we can go on to the next task. Now, if a protocol is not working or is making the person's symptoms worse, then of course it's appropriate to change protocols and figure out why the protocol you decided to use is not working. So the next step is, of course, and I kind of alluded to this already, is monitor the client's baseline concerns each session and consider adjustments to the protocol and the training plan if appropriate. Then, of course, every 10 to 20 sessions or so, I do another assessment just to see how they progressed over time. Of course, it is important to also monitor the person every single session to make certain that even within the session, they're making the appropriate progress. So this is where the practitioner comes in as a coach. If we don't watch the individual we're training, or we don't watch the screen, or we don't watch the physiological or the aspects that were shown on the screen about their physiology, then of course we can't be an effective coach, and of course the training won't be as effective. So to make any training protocol effective, the practitioner needs to be there and watch, and also be with the person and coach them. So here's some more training considerations to keep in mind when choosing protocols, or when to decide if a protocol should be changed or if it's working. Well, we have to also keep in mind that once we've decided, after the initial assessment and after integrating all the different metrics, we decide about a training protocol. But we also have to keep in mind that that training protocol may or may not work as effectively with this person as it did with another person. And there's also external variables that we may not have taken under consideration when we initially made the protocol that now became obvious, and so now it is time to change the training plan. So again, never get stuck on a training plan. If it doesn't work, or if there could be changes that are made to make it more effective, make those changes when you realize that they should be made, or when they are brought to your attention. Don't wait, don't continue training the person if you know that there's something that you could help the person with to make the training more effective. For instance, if we know that some of the person's dysregulations in their brain are due to hormonal issues, then getting their hormones, leveled out the way they need to be should be done in order to make the training protocols more effective. Again, that is one of the factors that needs to be taken under consideration when doing this type of training, or when deciding to do a certain protocol. Then also, every time we do make a decision about the training plan, we have to make sure that it matches the person's goal. We also make sure that in our expertise, we understand what's going on and we make the best decision possible. And also keep in mind that decisions to a training plan may and probably do change, because we can't take all variables under consideration that may come up. So again, the way that I think of it is, blessed are the flexible, for they will never be bent out of shape. And again, so same here. Stay flexible with your protocols. Stay flexible with your training plan. Have a plan. Always have a plan. But stay flexible enough to change that plan when necessary. The third consideration is to keep the person's goals in mind. So every time when we do adjust a protocol or adjust some training, we have to make sure that we're on the same track as our client. So again, that makes the training more effective, because if we know what the client's goals are, and they see that they're slowly getting towards their goal, and they know that what you're doing is working, they'll be more motivated. A more motivated person will have better results when it comes to neurofeedback, because they will be fully engaged in the activity. If a person doesn't think that something's going to work, they're not going to be fully engaged. So again, motivation is key to making any kind of protocol, especially neurofeedback protocols, effective. The other thing that I usually use is I tell the individuals of what they need to do until I meet them again. For example, I give them a list like this, and these are the homework assignments that I give them. Again, all of them are very simple. For instance, quiet the mind by increasing processing retrieval by using Autogenic Training. They can do that while they're doing heart rate variability training, and they can even do some of that stuff while they're driving in their car, while they're waiting in an office, or while they're waiting for a meeting to start. So again, they can use this type of training to quiet their mind. Then everybody takes a shower anyways. 1 to 5 minutes of taking a cold shower or ice bath helps a person with inflammation to reduce inflammation, helps the person recover faster, and also it it is an actual practical test to see how well a person can self-regulate. Because when you turn on the cold shower, you have to make sure that your breathing is regular. And it's not an easy, normal task to do. But again, that can be added without adding any time or stress to the person's life. Then also, during breaks, do breathing training. Also, I let the person know in order to adjust their circadian rhythm, to make the training more effective. If the person learns to go to bed at a certain time and wake up at a certain time, that usually helps with their circadian rhythm, which also helps them get better deep sleep and REM sleep. And so then they can recover faster and more effectively. Then also, physical activities should be kept in check within a certain amount of time a day, depending on the person's physical condition and their goals when it comes to training. That physical training will help the brain to also, by releasing endorphins and all that stuff, it helps the person to actually, again, feel a little bit better, stabilize their mood. So all these different factors are there to supplement or complement the training there in the office. So that, again, makes whatever training protocols we use more effective. So the summary here is that given near optimal levels of nutrition, exercise, sleep, and neuroendocrine balance, along with autogenic training, neurofeedback and biofeedback, and any type of other mental skills training, and doing the appropriate progression the way I laid it out here, or again, there are many types of progressions that are effective, but make sure that the progression you use is customized and tailored to the individual. In order to do that, you really have to understand what you're doing. You have to understand what the protocols do. You have to understand what the activity is in the brain that you want to adjust, and then pick the protocols according to that. Not just something that somebody else did and said, hey, this protocol works pretty well for people with attention issues. Well, that is a poor way of selecting a protocol. So to select a protocol that works, it has to be customized to the person's dysregulation, as well as goals. And so then once all that is accomplished, that allows a person to then function more optimally, cognitively, and mental health-wise. So to bring it all together, what is important first is we do an assessment. That assessment needs to have specific and well thought through and thought out metrics to collect information that will help us to understand the person's condition better. So it's not just an assessment to do an assessment, but it's an assessment to understand the person's condition. Once we understand the person's condition and specifically know where there is a dysregulation that obstructs the functioning of the individual, we can then create protocols and a progression of those protocols and biofeedback training that, again, makes sense and that builds on itself. That way, the person will have the most productive protocols. So the protocols that I selected for this presentation, all of those protocols are very, they're not just very effective, but they've been very effective, or some of the most effective protocols that I've used in my training of individuals. In addition to that, those protocols have a tendency, if used in a certain way, to build on each other, just like the types or different types of breathing. And again, we have to make sure that if somebody needs to learn a skill, they have to be able to be in a state where they can learn. If a person is not recovered, if a person's fatigued, if a person is overly sympathetically activated. So, for instance, people who have a history of trauma or PTSD, who have poor vagal tone, those individuals need to be able to self-regulate first before they can take advantage of neurofeedback training as well as they could if they were able to self-regulate to that extent. So again, that is it for this presentation. And before I end, I just want to let you guys know that a lot of this is also covered in our new course that is 100% self-paced online at this point. And again, it's in the military and first responder course that we put together. And that is one of the courses that Successful Practitioner and InMindOut have produced. And now we are offering that to individuals. Again, we have certain other classes that are coming up in September of this year. And again, those classes you can register for at Successful Practitioner. And here is a schedule of the September series and November series. So again, if you're interested in any of those courses, and if what you heard in this presentation spurred your interest, a lot of this will be further discussed in all our courses, and especially in the EEG courses, neurofeedback courses, well, all of the courses for that matter. All of this presentation is very applicable to all of them, and we integrate all of the different types of biofeedback. And, you know, again, doing that will make a person a better practitioner, letting them know how different areas or different modalities of neurofeedback or biofeedback can work together to bring the best results for our clients. Then again, in November, we have another series, and we also have several mentors who offer mentorship and various systems. So just check out our website, our Successful Practitioner website, as well as our InMindOut website for further information.